I will no longer be saying, oh, it's a shift in the seasons. And it's like, well, yes, but aren't you glad that this source, the universe, is knocking on your door and saying, got a little bit more work to do, Jane. How about it?
Yeah.
Well, it's almost as if you've just been reading this chapter of this book that we were going to review.
Let's go for it. You're
Well,
too funny.
I don't know if we're going to have time to get through it today now.
I'm sorry.
No, it's all right. Because Veronica and I were chatting a bit as well before you even came on. So,
well, that's good for me, Tony. Why don't you tell us what we should be studying for next week, and I'll jump ahead. I'm only up to page 30.
Okay. Well, look, that's all right. Have you picked up this book at all yet, Jane?
Yes. Oh, yes. I have Stephen Covey's book. Yes.
Have you read it?
Yes, I have.
Okay.
Yes. I know it.
I haven't read yet, but okay. No, so because you haven't been on the call for a couple of weeks, have you?
No, I haven't. I've been AOL for 2 weeks.
So this is actually would have been the third session. So we covered in the first session the introduction, part 1, which was paradigms and principles, and the chapters of Inside Out and the seven habits, an overview. And then last week we went on to part 2, which was private victory, and we covered habits 1 and 2. And they were big chunks. They were big sections of this book. I was probably being a bit over optimistic in trying to get through it all, but we did manage to get through those 2 habits. And then today, the plan was to do habit 3 and then the introductory part of part 3, which was paradigms of interdependence. But I'm not sure if you'd rather, because I think I'm the only person who's sort of up to date with it at the moment, because I know, Stan listens to it on audio, so he's never sure where he's up to. Yanni's been doing the same, but because both of them are missing for one reason or another today as well, we could just go back to discussing what we've covered up till now, or we could review this chapter that I was going to review, which was the last part of the second part, the last chapter of the second part, the third chapter of the second part. So it's up to you guys, really. Whether you want me to push on ahead with it or sort of do a bit of a review and chat in general.
I think a review would be good.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
yeah.
All right. Well, so I'll just go back because I'll have to look at what I've highlighted. So yeah.
Jane, I read it too, but I didn't think I had. I thought it had been on my bookshelf for years.
Yes.
And then when I pulled it out in the first meeting, and this piece of paper fell out, and it was a boarding pass for 2011, and I was 3/4 of the way through the book, so I had been reading it back in like what's that, 11 years ago.
But it's interesting.
So it's all fresh now.
When you find like I highlight my books as I go through, and I read this book years and years ago. I mean, it's probably even longer ago than that I read it. But I found a few things that I'd highlighted back then when I did read it. But there's so much more that I'm highlighting now compared to what I did first time around. And I put that down to a number of things. One is each time you go back to a book, it's like when you watch a movie a second time, you pick up things that you missed the first time around, which could be either that you zoned out or that it wasn't as relevant to you then. There's been some new input, some new life experience that's occurred in between that's made that particular comment or that aspect a bit more resonate a bit more with you than what it did when you first read it. So, I mean, if you're talking at least probably 10 to 20, it might even be 20 years since I read it. I don't know. But there's a lot happened in that time.
That's right.
And, I've got a completely whole different set of experiences to what I had back then behind me. So there's a lot more that I'm taking in, I think. Could be the coming of wisdom. You never know. But I'm highlighting a lot of stuff. I mean, sometimes I think it'd be easier just to highlight, not even bother highlighting because the whole book is worth highlighting. But no, I'm trying to pick out the key parts. So I tend to highlight good stuff in yellow, and then if there's a particularly salient point or something that I really want to bring out, I'll highlight that in orange, which, as I always say, is the closest to gold that I can get. I don't know if you can buy gold highlighters. That would be pretty cool. I see those sort of comments or those sections as being the gold nuggets, you know. Do you look like you're busting to say something?
Me? No.
No? Okay.
No. We're just agreeing.
All right. Well, you can jump in.
Emphatically.
I'm just reviewing. I mean, I'll just go back through and just cover what we sort of covered so far. And then I won't put this in the series as part of the recording, perhaps, or just I'll make it available for you guys. So the part one was paradigms and principles. So the first thing is that he's written. Let's just draw attention to this fact. This book was written, published in
1989 or something.
No, I'm just trying to find where the actual copyright 1989. So he wrote it in 1989, first printed in 1990. So that makes it, what, 30, what are we, 1990? Yeah, 31 years, 32 years old.
Right.
And a lot's happened in that era, hasn't it? We've really done a lot of changes. But that's the interesting thing about a book like this, is it's about paradigms and principles. So principles are pretty much consistent through the ages. We've got certain references that are different. Like, for instance, social media wasn't around in 1989, really. You think about that, the internet wasn't really a thing. It existed, but only really for the military. It was only just starting to take off. It didn't really take off till probably the early 2000s, did it?
Right.
So that's definitely had a huge impact on the way we interact, the way we do things, the communication and the ability to connect with people, I suppose, but in a different way. And in some ways, it's damaged our ability to connect with people because, you know, things like text messages and emails and the busyness and the noise have sort of replaced a lot of the human contact that used to occur face to face prior to that. So just turn my phone off. Hold on.
Yeah, well, 55% of our communication is body language, so we're missing out on that through texting.
Yeah, I mean, you've got Zoom calls now, which, and the fact that we're able to communicate with Jane the other side of the world, that's, you know, that would have been unthinkable. I mean, I can remember phoning my brother when I was back in Jersey and he had emigrated to Australia, and phoning, and you had that echo on the line because the telephone lines were the the cables under the ocean, and you get sort of delay. You'd say something and then you'd talk over the top of each other, and then you'd have to go back and say, no, you go first.
And the whole exercise of connecting and getting the right numbers, and
yeah,
it was, yeah.
So it's interesting how much the world has changed in that time, and it's like an exponential growth as we're rushing towards even faster times. But yet principles are the sort of the guiding lights. So this is the point that he works on, and it relates exactly to what you were just talking about, Jane. The first chapter being inside out. So
with the Pygmalion effect.
Well, inside out, meaning that we start with focusing on ourselves and what the impact we can, look to yourself first. Well, physician, heal thyself. Look inside first. If you want to change anything, or if anything's not going right, you want to improve a situation, look at what you can do to master yourself. And so, yeah, it's not necessarily the weather, changing season, or, the season of what's going on around you, whether it's politics or, economic change or changing times. I mean, Jim Rohn said it really well, that, you know, situation today is going to be probably about the same as what it was about 10 years ago, and probably about what it will be in another 10 years. It'll be opportunity mixed with adversity. That is a consistent, yes, the challenges may be different ones, but the same situation exists really, which is there's always going to be challenges, there's always going to be opportunities. What we zoom in, what we tune into is what's governed by our state of mind and our self-mastery. So he says, that quotes David Starr Jordan at the beginning, there is no real excellence in all this world which can be separated from right living. Now, David Starr Jordan was the founder of Harvard, was it? Was it Stanford? I can't, it was one of those anyway. I did get it right in there because I looked him up in the when I did the actual. Because I thought, who the hell's that? I'd never heard of him. Yeah, so the Pygmalion effect, absolutely, self-fulfilling prophecies, and this principle of the lens itself shapes how we interpret the world. So very much in tune with the coaching training that both V and I have had, and in terms of NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, and the concept of you creating your world around you, like you have your map of the world. And I know that was a big revelation for V to rediscover what we meant by that. The lens
is not the territory.
Yeah, the map is not the territory. That's right. So the world is not what you might say that it is. It is what it is because that's the way you're filtering things. So we all perceive the world differently. We all perceive situations differently, based on our framework, based on our references. So if you want to change the weather around you, take the weather with you. So that's me.
So true.
So yes, to change ourselves effectively, and this is the title of the book, is 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. To be effective, we first have to change our perceptions. So he talked about these 2 different ethics or frames of reference, if you like, the character ethic and the personality ethic. So the character ethic taught that there are basic principles of effective living, and that people can only experience true success and enduring happiness as they learn and integrate these principles into their basic character. But shortly after World War I, the basic view of success shifted from the character ethic to what we might call the personality ethic. Success became more a function of personality, of public image, of attitudes and behaviors, skills and techniques that lubricate the processes of human interaction. This personality ethic essentially took 2 paths. One was human and public relations techniques, and the other was positive mental attitude. So you heard these maxims like your attitude determines your altitude. Smiling wins more friends than frowning, and whatever the mind of man can conceive and believe it can achieve. I'm sure you've heard of those quotes before.
Yeah.
And if you look at it, I think there's even another dimension again, because social media has taken it to this whole new level of influencers and people aspiring to present this image of living the perfect life. And, you know, it's gone to a whole other level because of the transparency of social media, or the not transparency, the ability of people to create a brand and a perception that actually might not be true at all. And so you've got other people getting depressed and feeling inadequate because they're looking at these so-called perfect people on social media and going, well, hang on, my life's pretty shit in comparison to that. So I must be a failure. And there's a lot of that going on. So how we can combat that is going back to the underpinning foundation, which is really the character ethic. And the character ethic involves things like integrity, humility, fidelity, temperance, courage, justice, patience, industry, simplicity, modesty, And that old favorite, the golden rule, you know, doing unto others as you would have done unto you, or treating others the way you'd like to be treated. But actually, a twist on that was treat others the way they'd like to be treated, not the way you'd like to be treated, because you might like to be treated differently to the way they'd like to be treated.
Is that the platinum rule?
That might be.
I think it is. It's a platinum rule.
Well done. So we've gone from gold to platinum. There you go. Awesome. What comes after platinum?
It's about time. That's
So,
great.
He gave this story about his son and how he and his wife had struggled with the son, and how he was sort of not performing at school, and they realized that they were constantly comparing him or judging him, trying to clone him in their own image or measure him against social expectations, rather than embracing who he was and rejoicing in his uniqueness and allowing him to develop himself. So you can't live vicariously through your children. You can't control other people. You can never control what people think or how they behave or how they want to perceive something. You can influence it maybe by making new information available to them, or perhaps explaining how you see something and hope that they get it, but you can't force your opinions onto somebody else. And that's an interesting one in these times, isn't it, with social media and keyboard warriors?
I tried that for many years with my family and realized the only way to influence them is to make the changes myself and then let them ask the questions later.
Yeah, and let them catch up. Let them go, hang on, why is she so happy all the time? And why is she so positive?
Exactly.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. What's wrong with her? That reminds me of, I don't know if I've told you this story, but I used to, back in the early days of many different jobs that I've had, I was a deputy store manager at Big W, which is a big discount store chain here in Western Australia. And I used to walk in the morning and into my sales office, and I had to pass through this other office where these two ladies were doing all their admin and paperwork and so on. And they were the most negative Nancys. They were, honestly, they'd sit there like these, one was quite elderly and one was fairly youngish, but they'd sit there and fester in their misery, the two of them. And, you know, as you walked in, there'd be this undercurrent, oh, this bloody place, mutter the whole time. So I made it my point every morning. I'd walk in and I'd just go, clap my hands, go, good morning, ladies, and how are we today? Ready for another exciting day? I'd really rev it up. And they used to go, oh, God, what's wrong with him?
Oh, they must have said, it's him again.
I tear them up. It was great fun. Because they were, you know, where people are, they're in a mood or a bad mood or in a grump, and they just want to stay like that. And I'm sure we all get those days when we feel a bit like that ourselves, but you realize you're being stupid and you can shake yourself out of it. You've just got to, you know, give yourself a good slap around the face or something and go, hang on a minute, look at what I've got here. Look at the life I've got. Look at what I'm grateful for. And so
Exactly.
we fester away in that grumpy mood. And that's what these women used to do all the time. Great fun. So the principle there is, if there's little or no trust, there is no foundation for permanent success. So the personality ethic is relevant, but it only works if you've got the underpinning foundation of the character ethic. So that's what starts with us mastering ourselves. That's really the heart and soul of that chapter, I suppose.
I like to think of it that the character ethic is what is going to sustain us. The personality thing is going to come and go. So we'll see through those people eventually, whereas character stands the test of time.
Yes, and I think this this quote by Emerson is quite relevant. It says, "What you are, shout so loudly in my ears, I cannot hear what you say." So really,
I always love that.
You know, how we behave is a visual demonstration of what we believe, and you know, the way we conduct ourselves consistently. Okay, we'll have bad days. We'll admit that. We'll have, you know, the incident, the road rage, or the the annoying person in the supermarket, or whatever it is. We all get affected by those things now and again. But our ability to snap ourselves out of it and restore our mood and our sort of our way of being back to its default setting. Is the default setting is really underpinned by your character, and that's what people either like or love or hate about you, depending on their frames of reference. So those people, the ladies I was talking about, used to find me a pain in the ass because I was always so positive and like, what the bloody hell's wrong with you? Why are you so positive? What's to be miserable every day like you? That's going to be a great start, isn't it? So that's a paradigm. A paradigm is the way we see the world, not in terms of our visual sense of sight, but in terms of our perceiving, understanding, and interpreting. So having a paradigm shift means we can change that reference, and because those references then change the way we think and therefore the way we act. And in that chapter, he also gave those examples, the picture where you can see the old lady and the young lady, and when you first look at it, you maybe can only see one or the other, but not the other one. And then once it's pointed out to you, you can go, oh yes, I can see both pictures now. And it's the same if you look at clouds and things like that. You can see different shapes. It's only when somebody points it out to you, maybe that suddenly, oh well, yeah, I can see that now, but you couldn't see it. It was there, but you couldn't see it before because your references were different. So the more we become aware of what are our references, what are our paradigms, then we can understand ourselves better, which then can lead to self-mastery and knowing how you'll react in different situations. You can sort of become aware. I think self-awareness is the biggest thing, isn't it? It's a bit like the 12-step thing. The first thing about alcoholism is admitting that you're an alcoholic. Once you become aware, you've accepted that, then you can deal with it. But until you accept it, you can't really deal with it. So whatever the flaw is in our character, once we know what it is, we can work on it. But if you just drift through life and you don't sort of take the point that there could be another way of looking at a situation, then you won't shift your paradigm. So one, I can't remember if it was in this chapter, I think it was a later chapter, but it was the reference, or the most recent chapter was the reference to Sadat of Egypt, how he hated the Israelis and realized that they were never going to achieve peace in the region unless he shifted his paradigm. And so he looked into how he could change his attitude towards the Israelis. And that led to the peace process that eventually resulted in the Camp David Accord, ending, a lot of conflict and a lot of loss of life and misery and all the rest of it comes with war. So it takes people to change those principles. And there was a great story about the ship going towards didn't realize it was a lighthouse he was going towards, thought it was another ship. Did you hear that one, Jane? You remember that one? So the captain of the battleship signaling in the fog, change course, we're on a collision course, and the other ship's flashing back. No, you change course. He's getting exasperated and says, well, I'm a battleship, you better change course. And he goes, I'm a lighthouse. So you're not going to win that battle, are you? So the battleship then had to change.
I know, that's marvelous.
So there's that lovely quote. It is impossible for us to break the law. We can only break ourselves against the law. A bit like the ship against the rocks that the lighthouse is warning us about. What else? So he explores all these different character traits. And I think one of the key things I'll just pick out there, because I'm covering a lot of ground here quickly, was this concept of contribution or being serving people, serving the community, being of service to people. That is one of the fundamental character traits, I suppose, that if we can work on that, it has massive consequences. It has a massive effect on our effectiveness, because a lot of it is either karma or you lead by example. You become a leader, you become an influencer, in the true sense, because people observe the way you are and what you're doing and what you stand for, rather than, you know, what the branding image is that you'd like to create, that you know is fluffy and lacks substance. Can you all still hear me? Because you've frozen on me here. My internet connection is a bit slow. Hoping you're still there. I've got frozen faces on my screen.
Really, I can
The gooseberry hill.
I can hear you and see you.
Okay, all good. We're back again. Everything's fine.
Oh, okay, good.
Yeah, anyone thoughts on that?
Well, it is still talking about the character versus personality, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, so it expands into this concept of what he calls private victories. So the work on ourselves, the self-mastery, is a private victory because it's private to us. It's only something that we can only work on. Other people can't work on it for us. And that's the underpinning part about becoming effective, is that if we can work on ourselves first and have the private victories, then we can go to what he calls later the public victories. So in other words, you can't really influence people without first influencing yourself. You can't change people without first changing yourself. So this is the inside out approach. That's why the chapter is called Inside Out. Private victories precede public victories, and that making and keeping promises to ourselves precedes making and keeping promises to others. It says it is futile to put personality ahead of character, to try to improve relationships with others before improving ourselves. That old thing, if you don't love yourself, it's hard to love other people. Not impossible, but hard, because what keeps getting in the way is us.
Mm-hmm.
So that was
I think
really
it's a different level of love. I mean, you can love without loving yourself, but it's not unconditional love. It's kind of more a trade-off.
Yeah, thank you. That's a good distinction. You can love other people unconditionally. Because of our own inner critic, it's probably in some ways harder to love ourselves consistently. But if we can become the kind of person that we aspire to be, then we become more lovable, don't we?
I think though that you can't have love without freedom. And I think love, unconditional love, I don't know. I think it has to spring from love of the self. I don't think you can have unconditional love if you don't love yourself. I
agree with that. It's a different kind of love. It's a different level when you're loving other people and you don't love yourself. I think mothers go through a lot of that. They've got a lot of self-criticism, but they obviously love their children, but it's not at the same level as if they unconditionally love themselves. And then I think the child benefits from that as well.
Well, freedom's probably a good word to use there, because you give your children the freedom to be themselves and to still love them unconditionally anyway.
Mm-hmm. Right. I think the longer I live, I have to say I see love really kind of masquerading as behind certain love. There's a lot more fear than there needs to be. Fear of losing the person, kind of a thing.
Yep.
And so I've witnessed people giving and giving And essentially they're giving and in order to get, because the other person's not really coming to meet them. The other person is saying, well, I'll just keep giving for the two of us. And it's like, well, what do you got there?
Yeah, that's not healthy.
Right?
Yeah, so
Yeah.
that's a good point. I mean, it covers this. I'm because I've gone ahead now. I'm not quite sure where my references are up to here, but he does talk about that. You've got to put some boundaries around things, and you really do need to work on part of that character ethic is about keeping your word to yourself, about looking after yourself as well. And he talks about the golden goose. So the difference between production and production capacity, P and PC, this reference he comes back to a few times. The true effectiveness is a function of two things: what is produced, which is the golden eggs, and the producing asset or capacity to produce, which is the goose. Now, in a sense, we are the goose because we can produce, but not if we don't look after ourselves. We can't lay the golden eggs if we don't look after the goose, and we are the goose. All right. So in this analogy, but
Right.
it could also be another person is the goose. You know, if you've got a good employee, you don't mistreat them, because then you're going to lose the production that they produce, because they're a golden goose.
I think we need to keep that in context, though. Don't go calling people gooses.
No, not in Australia. It's
Right.
This is a term of stupidity. Yeah, so it comes back to this sort of sowing and reaping thing as well. But what Aristotle quoted at the start of the next chapter, the 7 habits and overview: we are what we repeatedly do. Excellence then is not an act, but a habit. So this is why he's come up with the 7 habits of highly effective people. The first 3 habits move us from being dependent. So like when we're young children, we're dependent on our parents. Perhaps if we haven't matured emotionally, we might be dependent on our partner, or a mentor, or a parent, or a really good friend. And so we move from dependence as we mature to independence, where we can operate on our own. We can think for ourselves, we can make our own decisions, we can run our own life. But then real maturity occurs in the next level again, as we move through private victories to public victories, and we go on to realizing that interdependence, or collaboration, if you like, is the key, that we can achieve far more by working with other people around us than we can individually. So that's how we become more effective, is in our ability to influence, inspire, collaborate, respect people, draw out of them the best contribution, by being that character ethic that we talked about, by being all those, you know, the example, by being full of integrity and contribution and all those good principles. If we can live a principled life rather than one that ebbs and flows with our moods, then we set that foundation, and then we attract more of the right people to cooperate with, to collaborate with. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
That's me.
I'm only just getting to the collaboration stage in the last couple of years. Before that, it was complete independence. So yes, I get it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like, it is a stage of growth that you go through, where you sort of think you know it all, you can do it all yourselves, and that old story about you suddenly realize that your parents aren't as stupid as you thought they were. They've grown a lot in the last few years. As you get older, you suddenly realize you, the teenager, actually didn't have a clue what you were talking about, and your parents were right all along. And it's only as you become a parent yourself, where you mature and you have to start facing the things that they had to face, you suddenly go, oh, now I get it. Now I know what they actually did for me, and you know what was important, and why they taught me this, and it all starts to fall into place. And then just when we start to get it figured out, we're, you know, on the last legs. So, so then we try and pass it on to our children and our grandchildren, don't we?
Yeah. You know
Yeah,
what I
go
was kind of struck by, and it was in the 90s when I read Stephen Covey's book, because I remember where I was working and how we were all reading it. And it's been that many years, but you know what story I'll never forget? It was just such an aha moment, was the one where um, he tells the story of how he was on a subway in New York and a
yes.
man and his children get on, right? And they're really full of it. They're just bouncing off the walls and what have you. And then come to find out, you know, the man and the children just lost their wife and mother. And it's like, oh, we were, you know, like it just changed everything. So I still to this day, whenever anyone cuts me off when I'm driving, I go to, they're on their way to the hospital, you know, because otherwise you want to chase after them or start losing control or whatever, right?
Yep.
So I credit Stephen Covey for that.
Mm.
And having just been rereading these chapters, that's exactly what's happened to me in the last week. A few times people have cut me off in traffic, and I've just gone, well, they must be in a rush to get somewhere. Just let it go. So exactly what you've just described. Ah, my tea, thank you.
That's so fun. Yeah.
Yeah, so it is exactly that. We suddenly become aware that we may not have all the information. We may be making assumptions, and go back to the four agreements. You know, Don Miguel Ruiz. Don't make assumptions, because we don't know the whole story. We don't know the other person's story. Just what we see is that person cutting you off in traffic. What we don't know is what was going through their mind. Why are they in a rush? What's happening? It may just be that they're an idiot, but it may be that they're on the hospital in a life-threatening emergency.
And the
Yes.
thing is, no matter how angry you get with them, it doesn't affect them. It's only affecting you.
Exactly.
So what's the point?
Yes. Yes.
It doesn't help anybody.
You're drinking a cup of poison and expecting the other person to die.
Yeah.
Oh my God. That was another quote that just flipped my hair back when I first heard it. I just said, that is marvelous.
And yet it's so easy to fall victim to, isn't it? It's so easy to think, to fester away about what somebody else has done, or when you feel aggrieved, or you feel that, you know, you've been victimized, or, you know, you're angry about something, and you realize the other person's not even thinking about you. They don't care. They've moved on. They've got their own stuff going on, and you're the one sitting there festering away. Hang on a minute.
Yeah. Yeah.
Who's the idiot here? And it comes back to, in this chapter, habit 1 was about being proactive, in the sense, not just in the management sense of planning ahead, but in the sense of living according to your principles, or what you actually, how you want your life to be. And so that's being proactive, and realizing that you shape that. Your decisions, your choices shape your destiny. So the greatest example ever, one of the most powerful books I've ever read, he references Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning.
Oh, powerful.
And how you can be in the most unbelievably bad situation, and he was in a concentration camp, and yet realized that no matter what they did to him, they tortured him, they beat him, they killed his family, he could choose how he responded. And when he thanked the guard for picking him up off the floor after a particularly bad beating one day, the guard was so affected by that, he couldn't believe that this guy's thanking him after being beaten up, just for the simple kindness of helping him get up off the floor, that the guard then started smuggling him food, which probably saved his life in the long run.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you come back to the fact that only you can choose your response to anything, then you have the ultimate power. No one can make you think something you don't want to think. Can't make you do something that you don't want to do. Really, they can you know, force you or torture you, coerce you into doing something physically, but mentally they can't get your engagement. That's your ultimate final choice. It's up to you, and that is controlled by your principles and your paradigms, your way of looking at the world. The freedom to choose. So that's really what that first habit was about, being proactive. That first chapter of the seven habits. And then habit 2 was moving into beginning with the end in mind. So as we're shifting from dependence to independence, start thinking. So he says there's 2 levels of creation. There's the creation of what you want in your mind's eye first, and then the third level is in creation of in actuality. So this is why people win gold medals at the Olympics and so on. They don't just run faster on the day. They have imagined themselves running faster. They've imagined themselves crossing the finish line. They've imagined themselves standing on the podium with the gold medal around their neck. And you think back to some of the things you've achieved in your life, you saw it happening in your mind first. You created something that didn't previously exist. You created a new reality by imagining it first. And then you go and make it happen. It might not happen exactly as you imagined it, but pretty much quite often it does. And it can happen exactly as you imagined it if you repeatedly visualize something and repeatedly imagine it. And you go back to the days of the Vietnam War and the prisoners that were in the camps there. The ones who survived were the ones, same as with Viktor Frankl's associates, the people who survived were the ones who could imagine a life after this horror has finished, what they were going to do, you know, what business they were going to run, how they were going to bring up their family, where they were going to live, all these sorts of things that they imagined. Because in your mind, you're always free. And I love this, going back to that previous chapter, this quote where, I can't remember the exact quote, but where Viktor Frankl says that he realized he was more free than the guards that were imprisoning him. Because they had to be there because they were ordered to be there. They didn't particularly want to be there, but they were told, this is what your job is, to look after these prisoners in this horrible place. And a lot of them probably didn't want to be there, but they had to follow orders. Whereas he could choose to think whatever he wants to think. They might think it, but they weren't allowed to do anything about it.
Yeah.
So beginning with the end in mind is about imagining how you want things to be. And there's this quote from Oliver Wendell Holmes: what lies behind us and what lies before us are tiny matters compared to what lies within us. Look carefully at the people around you. What difference would you have liked to have made in their lives? He talks about imagining your own funeral. Something I've done as a coach with people sometimes is to write your own epitaph. We'll go, what would you like people to remember you for? What would you like them to say about you if you were at your funeral and you could listen in? Who would you like to be speaking up, and what would you like them to say? And that's quite a confrontational exercise to do, but well worth it, because if you think, well, rather than just drifting through life and having no real purpose, which, okay, that's some people's choice. If that's what they want to choose to do, that's fine. But they get whatever life throws at them, whatever the universe throws at them. But if people define the kind of life that they want to live and the way they want to be, the way they want to conduct themselves, they can be more effective. They can make more of those dreams come true and become a highly effective person, because they begin with the end in mind. You don't just decide, I'm going to put up a building and we'll just kind of figure it out as we go. We'll throw a few bricks here and we might put a bit of plumbing work over there, and I'll have an electric socket around there. You know, there's a plan, there's a blueprint before you start. Otherwise, how do you know what materials you need? And otherwise, you get halfway through and then go, oh, actually, we stuffed up. We didn't put the foundation in properly. You got to pull it all down and start again. So life's like that. It's no difference to building a building in a sense. You've got to have the underpinning foundation there, and that's your character, I think.
Mm-hmm. Have you ever heard about the dash?
Yes. You told us.
Right? Oh, I did. Oh my gosh. Oh, thank you.
So you were on that call when we covered that, because, well, which call was it?
I think that was back with Motivation Manifesto.
Motivation Manifesto.
It was. That's right. Yeah, that right. So that when you said what would you want others to say at your funeral, that reminds me of the dash. So
Yeah, brilliant.
mm.
Which, if anyone's listening to the recording and hasn't heard that before, the dash is the second part of your life dates. So the date you were born can dash the date you die. What is in between is the dash. Yeah,
Exactly.
very powerful. You were the first person I heard that from. I have to credit you with that.
Oh.
And I thought it was very powerful.
Mm.
So do we live a life of design? Can we create our own life? And he's made this distinction between management and leadership, you know, that management is doing things right, leadership is doing the right things. So beginning with the end in mind is the leadership part of it, where we think, this is what I want to achieve, this is how I want it to be, this is the business I want to create, this is the lifestyle I want to create. We start with that end in mind, and that's the leadership part, the visualization, the creative side of it. Then the management part is actually putting the nuts and bolts in place to bring it all to fruition. But you need that inner compass to give you the direction in the first place. And I love this quote too. Efficient management without effective leadership is, as one individual has phrased it, like straightening deck chairs on the Titanic.
Oh, I know. Yes.
That was I only highlighted it in yellow. I'm going to change it to orange.
Highlight it in gold now.
It really is, isn't it? Powerful.
Mm-hmm.
Assuming you know what the Titanic was. So if you had never heard of the Titanic, that quote would be meaningless to you. You didn't know what a deck chair was. See how references are so important? It's like when you have to explain a joke to someone and they don't, because they just don't get it. Then by the time you've explained it, it doesn't really seem that funny anymore.
Oh, yes. Yes.
So there's a key part that he goes on to really about collaborating as well, is listening to people, understanding, do they actually have the same frames of reference as you? If we use one simple word like love, and we asked each of us to define it, we could come up with completely different definitions. So even with language, what does a word mean? The word might mean something different to each of us. So when we're trying to explain a concept to people, we have to first check that they understand the same thing by that word as we mean by that word. So in any communication, we're always having to check things. We're having to go, hang on, explain it back to me. What did you get from what I just said there? And that's a key sort of management tool, isn't it? Getting staff to explain things back to you that you just explained to them. That can be a real eye-opener sometimes. So he talks then about having a personal mission statement, and this is the funeral exercise sort of leads you to that. Well, if that's the end, if you want people to say all these good things about you at your funeral, what kind of behavior would you need to exhibit to get to that point? And having a mission statement of how you want your life to go gives you some, like a frame of reference or a blueprint, if you like. And then he breaks it down into all these different things. And as you said, not being centered around another person or money or possessions or family or your work, like not being controlled by any of these one things. And I remember years ago I did some work with the Center of, I was a mentor at the Center of Entrepreneurship for Curtin Uni, and one of the frameworks was that when they described a business, it was like the Roman temple, you know, with all these pillars, your business and or your life are really, if you can imagine your life being propped up by all these pillars or these legs. So for instance, if you have a balanced life and your partner leaves you, your whole world doesn't fall apart, because you've still got hobbies and interests, you've still got friends, you've still got work, you've still got health, you've got all these other things that are working. So just if one aspect doesn't work, the whole thing doesn't immediately crumble and fall. But if you don't look after all these different pillars, you don't have the right foundations there, it's very easy for it to crumble, for things to go completely wrong. So you're constantly looking at checking that you've got all these pillars in place and that they're all working for you. So he does an analysis of all these different things that you might be kind of leaning on too heavily. And in terms of security, guidance, wisdom, and power. So that's in that chapter on beginning with the end in mind, as he covers, you know, what happens if you're too focused on money, or what happens if you're too focused on the church or a friend or your spouse or whatever. So I won't go into all that, but it's really covering that we need to put that foundation in place, and then we need to identify how we want our life to be in all these different areas, really. So, and starting with yourself, like if you want to have a great marriage partner, start with being a great marriage partner. If you want to have a great business, be the best business person you can be. You know, if you want to be a good manager, start with being a good example to your staff. And that's where we're up to, because we were then going to do what we were going to cover today, but we won't now. It was habit 3, which is putting first things first. So we'll come to that next time. So that's pretty much reviewed where we're up to, very speedily at the end there. But it talks about your creative visual right brain is one of your most important assets, both in creating your personal mission statement and in integrating it into your life. So the difference between drifting and living a life by design. That's where you're working towards becoming more effective. In other words, you can achieve more of the things that you set out to achieve. You can become the person you'd ideally like to be, instead of the person that you just drift into being. Your thoughts, people. Powerful book.
Yeah, even though it's 30 odd years old, it's still really, the way he's written it is really useful, especially, you know, that's the first time I've heard the map as the territory for like 15 years and didn't really understand it until his example. And I think that's the thing, is to having the examples in there to really hit home. It makes it a really good book, even it hasn't aged.
Well, that's the power of story, isn't it? The power we learn from stories, right from young children. We teach kids nursery rhymes and fantasy stories and all this sort of thing, fables. That's the greatest way that we learn, because, and actually it's interesting you say that, because it goes on to it in the next chapter about how we get that across, about how we, well, actually, no, it's another book I'm reading. I'm reading the Ikigai Journey at the moment, where they talk about the most powerful way of communicating with people as a sensei or as a mentor is to tell them a story and then let them stew on the implications of that story and the meaning behind it, and then maybe discuss it with them, rather than just telling them, this is what you do, or this is how you do it, or even this is why you do it, but giving them a story that lets them kind of come to the conclusion themselves. I suppose the Socratic method of teaching: ask people questions, lead them to discovering the answer for themselves, rather than just handing them the answer. Because then it seems to, oh, now I get it. Now the puzzle seems to be coming into place, and it all makes more sense when you figure it out yourself somehow. And quite often that might be the result of repetition, or resonance. You know, we can hear the same message from 10 different speakers. We might not like the way that, I don't know, Esther Hicks said it, or that you know, Jim Rohn said it, even if you don't like his voice or his accent or something like that. But you may love Tony Robbins, or you may love Stephen Covey, whoever it is that resonates with you. Suddenly you can hear the same message and go, now I get it. Makes sense to me. But that also can be where you're at in your life and what experiences you've had that have impacted on your ability to be ready to receive that message. But for me, this is one of those books you can go back to, as I have done again now, and find new gold nuggets in there that you might have missed first time around.
Yes.
I'm also finding, as I review some of these books, and this is why I've picked these ones in particular, because I remember that they had a powerful impact on me when I read them. And to go back to them again, they're having an even more powerful impact as we work through them and discuss them and integrate other people's take on things as well.
Yeah.
I'm really...
actually doing A Course in Miracles with Gary, and we're not even getting through one page in an hour.
Now we're really, I love the Course in Miracles.
I haven't done it, but I'm a big fan of Marianne Williamson and Gabby Bernstein, and both of them are really strong advocates of that. You know, and that's another one. I could come to their books as well. I love both of those authors.
Yeah, me as well. They're two of my favorite female authors, and yeah, what they get behind. Now who is Gary?
Gary de Rodriguez. He's an American coach. He lives in Arkansas, but he was in Dallas, and he's been all over the place. I'll send you some info on him, Jane, if you like.
Oh, I would like. Yeah.
Are you still doing your Vault meeting at your mastermind on a Wednesday morning?
Yes. Yes.
At 7 o'clock.
Is it Wednesday?
So for you, it's Tuesday night. It's 8 a.m. Australian Western Standard Time. So it's the same time as Tony's, but on a Tuesday night for you.
Oh, okay. He's in the vault?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
He's not very good at marketing himself. There's something that he still needs to work on at the age of 72, is actually marketing himself.
And he's in Texas?
He's now in Arkansas, but he was in Dallas.
Oh, okay.
But he still travels back to Dallas quite a bit. Yeah.
How about that? Oh, that's interesting. Oh, I'm glad you said that. Yeah, I would love to. Yeah, it's really amazing even how the Course in Miracles came about.
Mm.
You know, the history.
And Gary's actually met the authors as well, so he's got an inside scoop.
Wow. That is impressive.
Yeah.
So any last ladies on what we've covered so far? Anything, any revelatory moments or aha moments that you want to share, or anything to conclude before I've got to get going in a minute, because we're heading away down south for the weekend. It's a long weekend.
Down my way.
Oh, that's good. Oh, beautiful. You know, one of the other things was the years ago reading about the Albert Einstein, you know, a problem can't be solved at the same level of thinking that the problem was created. That was another something that, like, this book was so filled with like, so I'm glad that that you chose this.
Cool. Well, we'll be carrying on next week with the third habit, and which
beautiful.
Begin with the end in mind, which is quite a big chapter, big chunky chapter. Sorry, putting things first. I apologize. It was the second chapter.
Yes.
So putting things first, and then we might stretch to covering the introductory chapter of the next part, which is paradigms of interdependence, so introducing where we're heading next as we move from private victory to public victory to interdependence.
Sounds good.
That's what we'll be on next week. So if you can join us, same time, same Zoom reference, and, we'll move on from there.
Thank you. This is
All right.
wonderful.
Have a great weekend.
You
Thanks.
too, Tony. Bye, Veronica.